Night had already settled over the kingdom of Arendor. The last thread of sunset was fading behind the hills, leaving the sky a deep velvet blue. Old watchtowers slept in ruins along the horizon, their broken silhouettes softened by moss and time. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, with a faint hint of wood smoke drifting from distant homes where fires were being banked and doors gently closed. The northern road was quiet. No carts, no horses. Only a single traveler walked along it. His name was Alwyn. His cloak was simple and diake, worn at the edges from many journeys. His boots pressed softly into the moist ground, leaving footprints that caught glimmers of moonlight. Along his belt, hanging from a carved wooden ring, swung a lantern unlike any other in the kingdom. It was not large, it was not ornate, yet it held a quiet presence that seemed to press back the darkness without struggle. The frame was carved from pale oak, etched with spirals and old runes that shimmered faintly. Inside, instead of flame and smoke, floated a small sphere of light, gently glowing in a warm golden tone. The light bobbed and drifted inside the lantern as if it were a drop of liquid sunlight, alive and content. This light never flickered. It never burned out. It never needed oil. It simply existed. Soft, constant, kind. Alwyn was not just a traveler. He was the keeper of the Lantern Forest. Ahead of him, the road narrowed and curved between two ancient oaks. Their branches grew so thick and wide that they intertwined high above the path, forming a natural archway. Beyond that archway lay the Lantern Forest, a place spoken of in quiet tones around hearths and in marketplaces. Some called it enchanted, others called it haunted. But those who knew its true nature spoke of it with gentle respect. It was a forest for the lost, for those searching for something they could not name, for those whose hearts carried questions that did not fit easily into words. Alwyn reached the archway and paused for a moment. The golden light inside his lantern brightened slightly, as if it recognized the threshold. The wind was softer here, the rustle of leaves quieter, more controlled, like a whisper that did not wish to disturb anyone who might be resting. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called once, then remained silent. Alwyn stepped beneath the archway. The moment he crossed, the world shifted. The darkness was no longer heavy. It felt gentle, almost protective. Moonlight filtered through the canopy in long silver strands, laying soft paths upon the forest floor. A thin mist hovered near the ground, moving slowly, curling around roots and stones like a living veil. Fireflies drifted between the trunks of the trees, glowing in hues of pale gold and soft green. The forest knew him. It had known him all his life. Alwyn moved with no hurry. His role as keeper was never to rush. He followed a trail that only someone familiar with the forest would recognize, a winding pattern of stones, roots, and small, carefully placed markers that glowed faintly in the lantern light. Soon, he arrived at a small clearing at the heart of the entrance path. In the center of this clearing stood a stone statue, worn smooth by rain and wind. It was the shape of a robed figure holding a shallow bowl at chest height. Moss grew along its base. Vines twisted gently around its back. Yet the bowl itself was always clean, as if the forest refused to let dust gather there. Alwyn lifted the lantern and placed it in the stone bowl. The forest responded at once. The light inside the lantern brightened, and from it flowed thin ribbons of golden glow that drifted outward into the air, curling between branches, settling on leaves, touching stones. The trees seemed to sigh. Their leaves trembled lightly, even though the wind had not grown stronger. The moss on the ground shone softly, and small streams nearby began to mirror the lantern light, as if carrying it away in tiny liquid threads. Every night, the ritual was the same. Place the lantern. Wake the forest. Remind the paths that they were there to guide. Alwyn watched for a moment, letting the quiet magic spread. He closed his eyes and breathed in slowly. The air carried an old, familiar feeling, like the warmth of a memory that never fully faded. The lantern forest was not his to own. It was his to care for, to listen to respect. A soft crack of a twig broke the silence. Not a sharp, alarming snap, just a small sound, like a careful step from someone afraid to disturb the peace. Alwyn opened his eyes and turned. Between the trees, partially hidden in shadow, two green eyes watched him. They were bright, but not wild. Curious, hesitant, a small figure stepped forward, pushing aside a branch. It was a girl, perhaps 12 years old, wrapped in a tattered cloak that was too big for her shoulders. Her hair was tangled, falling around her face in dark curls. Her boots were caked in dried mud, yet there was something gentle in her gaze, something that had not yet been broken by fear or bitterness. Alwyn studied her quietly. "You are far from any village," he said, his voice calm and warm. "I know," the girl answered. Her voice trembled slightly, but not from cold, from something deeper. "I have been walking all evening." She took another step into the clearing. The light from the lantern washed over her, softening the hard lines of exhaustion on her face. A faint flush of color returned to her cheeks. "What is your name?" Alwyn asked. "Elara," she replied. It was an old name, a name that belonged in stories, spoken over songs, and in quiet lullabies. "What brings you to the lantern forest, Elara?" he asked gently. She hesitated. Then she reached under her cloak and pulled out a bundle wrapped in worn cloth. Her fingers, small and cold, moved carefully, as if the object inside were fragile. She unwrapped it slowly. Inside lay a small wooden lute. One of its strings was broken. Another hung loose. A thin crack ran along the front, but the instrument still held a delicate beauty, like something loved and worn through use rather than neglect. "This was my father's," Lyra said quietly. "He used to play it every night. For me, for my mother, for the neighbors, if they had time to listen." She swallowed. "He died last winter." Alwyn's expression softened. "I am sorry," he said simply. Lyra nodded once, looking down at the lute. Her fingers brushed the worn wood. "People in the village say his spirit loved these woods, that when he was young, he came to this forest to play. They say some nights, if you listen closely, you can still hear a lute in the distance, and that it guides lost people back home." She looked up, and for the first time her eyes shone with something that was not just sadness, hope, thin and trembling, but real. "I thought maybe he is here, somewhere in this forest. I thought, if I bring his lute, maybe he will know I am looking for him." The mist swirled softly at her feet. Somewhere high above, a branch creaked quietly. The forest listened. Alwyn's hand rested lightly on the stone statue. "The lantern forest remembers many things," he said. "Footsteps, voices, songs. It holds onto echoes of love more than anything else." Lyra stepped closer to the lantern. "Will you help me find him?" she asked. Alwyn studied her for a heartbeat, then nodded slowly. "Yes, tonight we will follow where the light leads." He lifted the lantern from the stone bowl. The golden glow pulsed once, like a calm heartbeat. The ribbons of light drifting through the forest adjusted, bending almost imperceptibly toward a path to the left. "The forest has already answered," Alwyn said softly. "Come." Lyra clutched the lute to her chest and fell into step beside him. They moved deeper into the lantern forest. The trees grew taller here. Their trunks rose like pillars into the dark, vanishing into a thick, whispered canopy. Patches of moonlight broke through in places, creating spots of silver on the mossy ground. The mist thinned and thickened around their feet, as if breathing. Alwyn walked with easy familiarity, careful to step where the roots were flat and the stones were steady. Lyra watched his steps, copying his movements. The forest did not feel frightening, only big and old. It was like walking through the inside of a very large, very quiet song. After a while, they reached a second clearing. This one was smaller, encircled by birch trees with white trunks and long, delicate branches. In the center stood a flat stone like a table, and above it was a branch where several small glass orbs hung from thin threads. Each orb held a tiny speck of light. Lyra stared. "What are those?" she whispered. Alwyn lifted the lantern. The golden light inside stirred, as if greeting the orbs. "These are memory globes," he explained. "Each one holds a moment, a fragment of someone who passed through here. A laugh, a thought, a promise. The forest keeps them, not to trap, but to remember." He stepped closer and gently touched one of the globes. It glowed brighter for a second. Lyra heard something faint, like a distant echo of children laughing. When Alwyn took his hand away, the sound faded, and the globe became soft again. Lyra watched with wide eyes. "Is my father here?" she asked. "Perhaps," Alwyn said. "Or perhaps his memory lies deeper in the woods, closer to where he once played." He placed the lantern on the stone. The golden light inside rose higher, almost touching the lid of the lantern. Threads of light reached out and gently brushed the hanging orbs. Some brightened. Some remained dim. One, near the center, glowed with a slightly warmer hue, almost like the color of candlelight in a cozy room. Alwyn noticed. "Come," he said. "The path continues in that direction." They left the clearing and followed a narrow trail that wound between the birch trees. The forest grew quieter, if that was possible. The usual night sounds, the rustle of small animals, the calling of birds, became soft and distant. Only the crunch of their footsteps and the faint hum of the lantern remained close. Lyra hugged the lute tighter. "Have many people come here lost?" she asked. "Many," Alwyn replied. "Some searching for loved ones, some searching for themselves, some not even knowing what they are searching for, only that their hearts will not rest." "Do they always find what they're looking for?" Alwyn thought for a moment. "They always find something they need," he said, "even if it is not what they expected." The trees began to thin slightly. The path opened onto a gentle slope that led down to a small stream. The water was calm, dark, and smooth. Yet when the lantern light touched it, tiny points of gold appeared along the surface, floating downstream like little boats made of light. Lyra gasped softly. "They look like stars," she whispered. "They are reflections of memories," Alwyn explained. "The forest sends them down this stream, so they do not grow heavy. When they reach the lake deeper within, they rest." They followed the stream for a while. The water's quiet murmur, combined with the slow rhythm of their steps, created a soothing pattern. Lyra felt some of the tightness in her chest loosen, even as her eyes stung slightly, thinking of her father. At last, the stream widened and fed into a small, still pond. The surface was so calm that it perfectly reflected the moon, the trees, and the lantern's glow. Fireflies drifted above it in lazy spirals, and along the shore, small stones had been arranged in deliberate patterns. "This is the listening pond," Alwyn said. "Sometimes the forest speaks most clearly here." He placed the lantern on a flat stone by the water. The golden light brightened, casting a long, shimmering trail across the pond. "Sit," he said gently. Lyra lowered herself onto the mossy ground. She set the lute on her lap and rested her hands on it. The night was very quiet here. Even the stream's sound was softer, as if muffled by invisible hands. "What do I do?" she asked. "Close your eyes," Alwyn replied. "Hold your father in your thoughts. Remember his laugh, his voice, the way he held that lute. Do not strain. Just remember." Lyra took a breath, then another. She closed her eyes. At first, her mind was full of noise, faces from the village, the sound of carts on stone, the bite of the last winter's cold, the ache in her chest when she woke one morning and her father was no longer breathing. But little by little, those edges softened. She remembered his hands, strong but careful, plucking the strings of the lute with ease. She remembered how his eyes always crinkled at the corners when he smiled. She remembered the songs he hummed under his breath while mending tools or stirring soup. She remembered the feeling of sitting by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, listening to him play gentle tunes that seemed to hush the entire world. Her throat tightened. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she did not open her eyes. She simply held the memory gently, as if it were something fragile and precious. The lantern pulsed. Golden light spilled outward, flowing across the surface of the pond like a soft wave. The fireflies drifted closer, their small bodies glowing brighter. The reflected moon on the water seemed to ripple without wind. Alwyn watched quietly. He did not speak. He had seen the forest answer like this many times, but every time felt unique, shaped by the heart that had called. A faint sound rose from somewhere, so soft that at first Elara thought she was only imagining it. A familiar pattern of notes, slightly out of focus, as if heard through a half-remembered dream. A lute, being played gently. Her eyes flew open, but the forest remained still. No one stood at the pond's edge. No visible figure walked between the trees. Yet the sound was there, clearer now. A calm, steady melody, played slowly, the way her father used to play when he thought she was nearly asleep and he did not want to wake her. Lyra's lips parted. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. "I do," Alwyn said softly. The melody continued, simple, soothing. It did not rush toward a chorus or demand attention. It simply wandered like a meandering stream, content to move without destination. Lyra's hands shook slightly as she lifted her own lute. She touched the broken string, then the cracked wood. "What do I do?" she asked again, voice barely more than breath. "Follow," Alwyn replied. "Not with your feet, with your heart." She closed her eyes and listened again. The melody shifted, weaving around a pattern she knew very well. A tune her father had played on the night before her birthday every year. It was the song he used when he told stories about journeys and bravery, about kindness and choices made in the quiet. The air near the pond grew warmer. A breeze rose, gentle and fragrant, carrying hints of pine and smoke and baked bread. Scents from her old kitchen, from nights when her father cooked slowly and hummed at the same time. Elara felt something inside her loosen. She did not try to hold back tears. They slipped down her cheeks, cooling her skin. "Papa," she whispered. The melody wove gently onward. The lantern's light lifted from its frame, just a little, stretching into a taller shape above the pond. For a moment, just the faintest moment, Lyra saw the suggestion of a figure in the glow. Shoulders, the curve of a head, a hand holding something that might be a lute. There were no sharp lines, no clear face, only a presence, warm, familiar, safe. Her breath caught. Alwyn remained perfectly still. His role was not to interfere, only to guard the space while the living and the remembered reached for each other. Lyra felt no fear, only a deep, aching tenderness. The melody slowed. Each note rang out as if given extra care, like a goodbye spoken with love and patience instead of haste. She lifted her fingers and, despite the broken string, tried to follow along on her own lute. Her hands trembled, but she remembered the way her father had guided her before, where to press, how to move. The sound that came from her instrument was not perfect. Some notes were soft, some slightly out of tune, but they were honest. They were hers. The melody in the air adjusted, gently wrapping itself around her fragile attempt. Rather than correcting, it supported, leaving space where she faltered, rising where she hesitated. Together, they played. The pond reflected not just the moon and the lantern now, but a faint outline of two figures sitting on a hearth, a child and a man, lit by a warm fire. It was only a hint, a shimmer in the water's surface. Any other passerby might have missed it, but to Lyra, it was clear enough. "You're here," she whispered. "I knew you were." The melody answered with a warm, low chord that felt like a hand resting gently on her hair. Her chest hurt, but in a different way now. Less sharp, more like a tight knot beginning to loosen. "I was afraid to forget your voice," she said softly, eyes still closed. "Afraid that if I stopped trying so hard to remember, you would disappear." Another soft chord, a note that felt like a smile. "You're in the forest," she continued. "In your songs, in this lute, in me." The melody shifted to a slow descending pattern, bringing everything back to stillness. The golden shape above the pond softened, collapsing gently back into the lantern. The reflection of the figures by the hearth faded, leaving only moon and trees and sky. The last few notes lingered, then dissolved into silence. Lyra opened her eyes. The pond was calm again. The fireflies had drifted higher. The mist moved lazily along the shore. Her cheeks were wet, but her shoulders had relaxed. Her breath came easier. "Thank you," she whispered, not sure if she was speaking to the forest, the lantern, Alwyn, or her father. Perhaps to all of them. Alwyn stepped quietly beside her. "The forest does not bring back what is gone," he said gently, "but it can show that nothing truly loved is ever entirely lost." Lyra looked down at the lute. The crack was still there. The string was still broken. Yet when her fingers brushed the wood, she no longer felt only pain. She felt warmth, a connection stretching backward and forward at the same time. "What happens now?" she asked. "That is for you to decide," Alwyn replied. "You may return to your village, carrying what you have found, or you may stay a while longer, if your heart is not ready to leave yet." Lyra looked around. The lantern forest no longer felt like a place of uncertainty. It felt like a place that knew her now, that had listened, that had answered. "Can I walk a little more?" she asked softly, "just to feel the forest, not to search, just to be." Alwyn nodded. "Of course." They left the pond and took a different path, one lit now by small points of light along the ground. The forest had adjusted. It no longer guided them with urgency toward any specific place. Instead, it simply made itself comfortable around them, like a friend sitting quietly nearby. They walked past an old stone wall, half buried in roots and moss, the last remnant of a cottage long gone. They passed a large tree with a hollow trunk where small flickers of light gathered, childhood wishes stored like tiny candles. They crossed a wooden bridge over a shallow stream whose surface glowed faintly with drifting golden specks. At times, they did not speak. Silence felt right, the kind of silence that did not weigh on the chest, but rested lightly on the shoulders. Eventually, the trees began to thin, and the familiar archway formed by the two ancient oaks appeared ahead of them. Beyond it lay the northern road, stretching back toward the world of markets and voices and daily tasks. Lyra stopped before stepping out. "If I leave," she said quietly, "will the forest forget me?" Alwyn shook his head. "The forest remembers every honest step," he said. "It remembers songs, tears, laughter, the way a heart feels when it begins to heal." Lyra looked down at her lute, then back at the shadowed paths behind her. "Will I be able to find it again?" she asked. "When you truly need it," Alwyn replied. "Your feet will find their way, or the light will find you. The forest is not a place on a map, Lyra. It is also a place inside." She thought about that for a moment. Then she nodded. "I think I need to go back," she said. "Mama is alone, and I want to play for her." A small, real smile touched her lips for the first time. "Maybe I will not play as well as he did, but I will try." "That will be enough," Alwyn said. She stepped out beneath the archway. The air outside felt slightly colder, sharper. The sky was beginning to pale, just a little at the horizon. Dawn was still far, but the night had passed more quickly than she realized. She turned one last time. Alwyn stood just inside the forest, the lantern hanging calmly at his side. The golden light inside glowed softly, no longer tall and bright, but steady and at rest. "Thank you," Lyra said again. "Walk gently," Alwyn replied. She adjusted her cloak, hugged the lute to her chest, and began down the northern road. Her footsteps were light now, not because her burdens had vanished, but because she no longer carried them alone. Alwyn watched until she disappeared around a bend. Then he turned back into the forest. The trees greeted him with a soft rustle. The mist swayed around his boots. Somewhere in the distance, an echo of a melody whispered through the branches, not from sorrow, but from memory. He returned to the first clearing and lifted the lantern once more into the stone bowl held by the worn statue. The forest seemed to sigh in contentment. Threads of light drifted out again, settling along paths and stones, ready for whoever might wander here next. For as long as the lantern forest stood, there would always be those who were lost. And as long as the light remained, there would always be a way to find a softer place to rest. Alwyn rested a hand lightly on the statue, closed his eyes for a moment, and listened. The forest was quiet, deeply, peacefully quiet. Somewhere far away, a rooster would crow. A village would wake. Bread would bake. Doors would open. But here, in the soft, calm heart of the lantern forest, night still lingered, holding its breath. The keeper and his lantern watched over it, patient, gentle, endlessly kind. And the forest, full of memories and music and love that would not vanish, kept them company.